This is part two of talking about Gog and Magog. So, if you just watched part one, we just laid the foundation for why I believe the Gog and Magog, there's multiple Gog and Magog battles that are going to take place, but I proposed the idea that the Ezekiel 38 was speaking of a war that is going to happen at the end of the millennial kingdom. But Ezekiel chapter 39 seems to be something completely different. And Ezekiel 39 seems to be speaking of what happens at the end of the tribulation. There's a specific order of operations that is going to naturally unfold in our timeline. And so it's really fascinating trying to understand and how to pick these things apart. And it's difficult, but it's doable. And we always need to remember that there is a correct answer. We just need to dive in there and figure it out. So let's go ahead and get on into Ezekiel chapter 39. In Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 2 down here, it says, "And I will turn thee back, and leave but the sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and bring thee upon the mountains of Israel." Now, this verse is so provocative because when you dive into it, you're like, well, hold on. Why in the world is God leaving a sixth part of thee? Like, how does that even make any sense? Why would God allow them to remain? Well, this is where it gets kind of interesting. The reason why there's going to be a sixth part that remains is because during the tribulation, there's going to be a decision on the earth for people to make. And that decision is either going to choose the Antichrist or they're going to have to choose Jesus Christ. There's the people who choose the mark of the beast are obviously choosing the Antichrist, and those who refuse the mark of the beast are choosing Jesus Christ. That is what the sheep and goat judgments are all about. When the sheep and goat judgments happen at the end of the tribulation, the sheep go on the right. Those are the ones who rejected the mark of the beast, and the goats on the left are the ones who accepted the mark of the beast. So it's going to be no problem at all distinguishing the right, the sheep and the goats. But my point here is that the sheep, all of the people, all of the humans who walk into the millennial kingdom when Jesus is reigning on the earth, they are all born again right when the millennial kingdom, right when the clock starts, right when Satan is bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, right when that clock starts, the millennial kingdom begins. And so the millennial kingdom is composed. It has a government that is going to be operating within that. Jesus is going to be king. There's going to be a Gentile branch of government, a Jewish branch of government. You see that all throughout the scriptures, which is really fun. But the thing to understand is that you and I, if you're a born again believer, we are going to be reigning with him during this millennial kingdom. The question is, who are we reigning over? And the answer is that we are reigning over the people who made it through the tribulation. They're going to be going into the millennial kingdom, and they're all born again believers. But what's interesting about that is that just because they're born again believers doesn't mean that they are perfect, because they aren't perfect. They just went through the tribulation. They made it through those 7 years by the skin of their teeth, and they walk into this millennial kingdom, and they're like, oh man, this is awesome. But you and I are going to have our glorified bodies on. You and I will not be able to sin. They, on the other hand, they will. And that is interesting because there is going to be a sixth part. So a sixth part of the people here in Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 2, this sixth part are the people from Magog who decided to choose to follow Jesus during this time. And this is why it's so interesting, because the people from Magog who at the beginning of the millennial kingdom chose to follow Jesus Christ, that just because they all were born again right then, I mean, there's a lot that can happen in 1,000 years, which is a lot can happen in the 7 years. Because at the end of the 7-year tribulation, you have the sixth part that are going to remain. Now, these people that remain at the end of the tribulation, the sixth part, they're going to walk into the millennial kingdom. So there's going to be people there living in the millennial kingdom from every nation. There's going to be Christians who are born again during the tribulation period, and a sixth part of Magog are going to be existing during that millennial kingdom. And so that sixth part, that give their life to Jesus during the tribulation, they are going to walk into the millennial kingdom, and they are going to all have children, and having children for 1,000 years. And then at the end of 1,000 years, that's where Ezekiel 38 comes in, because that's when they are going to that's when Gog is going to rise up. He's going to gather his forces, and there's going to be people who rebel during the millennial kingdom, which is absolutely unbelievable to even consider. But this is just to show you and I that just because there is a perfect government during that 1,000 years, and there is Jesus in a perfect government, a perfect kingdom, a perfect everything, just with all of those things included in this millennial kingdom doesn't mean that it's going to be a perfect system, a perfect people. When you keep on reading in Ezekiel 39, it says, "And as for you, son of man, thus says the Lord God, speak to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field." And then you go on, you keep on reading, and it talks about having this meal, a sacrificial meal. And it talks about the mighty being there, and they're going to be devouring the prince's blood, or flesh, all of this kind of stuff. It gets pretty gory. But this is interesting because this, Ezekiel 39, seems to be what John is describing in Revelation chapter 19. In Revelation chapter 19, John says, "Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was faithful and true, and in righteousness he judges and makes war." This is the unveiling of Jesus Christ. If you read the book of Revelation, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. And it goes on, John describes him. His eyes were like a flame of fire, his head many crowns. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, which is exactly what Isaiah was talking about in Isaiah 63. It says, "And in his armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses." You're getting the picture here. When Jesus returns, it says the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, which he deceived, those who received the mark of the beast and those who worship his image. These two were cast alive in the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. But here in verse 21 is where we need to focus on. In verse 21, it says, "And the rest were killed with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh." So you're seeing at the end, when Jesus returns at the end of the tribulation, there is going to be a great feast. And the birds are going to be actively involved. They're going to have a part to play. You have the birds that are being involved in the cleanup for this insane just slaughter that is going to take place when Jesus returns. And again, here in Ezekiel 39, you see that the birds are involved and every beast, and he is gathering them for this sacrificial meal. And you see the princes are there and the mighty is there, and that is all spoken of in Revelation chapter 19 as well. Revelation chapter 19, verse 17, it says, "Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and those who sit on them, and the flesh of people free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him, and him who sat on the horse, and against his army." This is really interesting stuff because, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, when you look at Ezekiel chapter 38, again, it seems to speak of a time when Ezekiel 38 seems to be speaking of what the events that take place at the end of the millennial kingdom. Ezekiel 39 seems to be speaking of the events that happen at the end of the tribulation. So in Ezekiel 39, you see 1/6 of Magog is allowed to remain. And so those 1/6 are going to be born again believers because they are going to walk into the millennial kingdom and they're going to repopulate. And there's going to be a whole bunch of Magogians just running around. But then after 1,000 years, people are going to choose, they're going to see Jesus and they're going to be like, you know what? I don't want to worship that guy. I don't want to. And so they are going to rebel during the 1,000 years. And so that's why you see there's punishments that Jesus is going to, whenever you hear the word or the phrase that Jesus is going to rule with a rod of iron, the question is, when is he going to rule with a rod of iron? And the answer is he is going to rule with a rod of iron during the millennial kingdom. And so when these people, these humans, and they're still sinful nature bodies, the ones that we have on right now, they are going to be in the millennial kingdom because they were born there. And so they are going to have an option. They're going to still be able to see Jesus, but then they're going to be like, you know what? I don't think I want to fall in line. I don't think I want to put my faith in you. And so they are going to reject Jesus. And so that is going to happen. And if you read the book of Zechariah, the last chapter, you see that there is a punishment for those who do not do what they are told to do. God is going to withhold rain from these people. And so that is basically disciplinary action for these people. Anyways, at the end of the day, there's going to be a revolt. Satan's going to be released. He's going to go to Gog at the end in Ezekiel 38. He's going to whisper something in his ear. Gog is going to go against the city of unwalled villages. And then that is when fire is going to come out of heaven, which seems to be connected to Revelation chapter 20. It's really fascinating. This is tough to all sneak in here in this 10 minutes on each of these videos. But that's the idea. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you haven't seen these videos or haven't followed us on YouTube, I want to encourage you to do it. It's ITZ underscore sheesh. And it's the same thing as my TikTok handle here. Thanks, guys.